Today's presentation is a second in a series of informational presentations that we've put together leading up to the 2021 regional plan that will be shown in March of this year. Last week we discussed a concept of innovation cycles, and we talked about the sixth innovation cycle really being dominated by things like data analytics and big data and artificial intelligence and machine learning. Those type of things were going to be very big in the next 30 years. And what we wanted to really do is to talk about big data in terms of, what is it, what's coming in the future, what are other agencies like SANDAG or member agencies doing, and what about issues of data privacy and data security? Those are all concerns that are wrapped around data. So our panel presentation today will focus on those questions, and then we will invite all of you to visit us in the Vision Lab, where we will have people who can discuss specifically how we are using data and applying it to the regional plan itself. Today with me I have Dr. Rajesh Gupta. He's a Distinguished Professor of Computer Science and Director of the Data Science Institute at UC San Diego. Professor Gupta holds Qualcomm's Endowed Chair in Embedded Microsystems at UC San Diego. He is a fellow at the IEE, IEEE, the ACM, and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. HDSI's goal is to foster a data science ecosystem for researchers, practitioners, and industry partners in the San Diego area, and to make San Diego a hub for a new data economy. That's something we kind of talked about last week. Next, we will hear from Andrell Bauer, the Chief Data Officer for the City of San Diego. She's responsible for identifying innovative solutions to streamlining government efficiency, promoting data-driven decision-making, and expanding accessibility of municipal information for all San Diegans. As a former newspaper data journalist and infographic artist, she learned to appreciate the power of data visualization and to share information with the public. She's thrilled to join the team at City Hall and use her experience to make more data accessible by implementing the city's first ever open data policy. Our third panelist is Christina Dumond. She is a senior analyst at Ohio State University Moritz College of Law program on data governance. She serves on the Data Advisory Committee Data Policy Needs Survey and Toolkit Working Group, and she supports the development of a Smart Columbus Data Privacy Plan. Ms. Drummond's background combines over 20 years of technology policy management experience across tech startups, not-for-profits, and academia. And last but not least, we have Sanjeev Nanda. He is SANDAG's entrepreneur in residence, where he is working on guiding us with the next operating system, which is part of the 5 big moves. In addition to that, he's focused on helping us with a data clearinghouse and a suite of tools to be used for regional transportation planning, operations, and end-user services. He has over 25 years of research and development, leadership and management experience. He initiated and incubated and led the R&D programs at Qualcomm most recently in the autonomous driving field, and prior to that in machine learning and context awareness. While he was at Bell Labs, he helped write the first Northern America and global wireless standards for 2.3 and 3G networks. With that, I'd like to hand the mic over to Professor Rajesh Gupta.
Thank you, Ray, and thank you, Chair, and members of the board for the opportunity to share with you the vision we have behind building the Halijuolu Data Science Institute at UC San Diego. We are tasked with building an ecosystem of talent, companies, startups, as well as effective data use policies and understanding of how data can be used for advancing society. So what I'm going to do is to just lay out the vision behind it and as to where we are. The first question is, what has changed? We have been using data for a very long time, from census to other areas, and why is it that we talk about data now today? And there are 2 main reasons for that. One is there is just so much of it and so many places that data is now being effectively collected, whether we like it or not, whether we use it or not, but it is there. It is there from, from our personal devices, your Fitbits to your Apple Watch, to your shopping experience at Amazon, to any time you go on the web, on your mobile device, or your computer, or anywhere other, to any of the multitudes of social interactions. All of these activities are leading to data that is being collected routinely and regularly. There's also data being collected by our social infrastructures, for example, the GPS systems or the satellites, looking at the water movements or the traffic or just geospatial data. There's data about microbiomes, there's data about genomic data that informs our healthcare and treatment. And then, of course, you have seen these ubiquitous cameras everywhere on the intersections. They're collecting data, they're collecting images, which are often very high resolution. We can make planetary diagnosis. We can look at the environmental data at the scales that was previously unimaginable at the planet scale. So that sensor data, that amount of data, leads to multiple possibilities. Some of those possibilities we are beginning to see already in our commercial world, in our recommendation systems when we go on our shopping experience and so on. But then there's a lot more we can do with data, we are beginning to do with data. And that's the biggest exciting story today. The combination of computing, the technologies have allowed us to look at data and through very sophisticated mathematics and the tools that are built around it. There are networks that automatically analyze pictures for content as to what the scene represents, what we hear, how we take the set of data and summarize them in ways in which the insight can be determined as to what the best course of action is for organizations or societies. So ways in which we can use data is leading to new kind of applications. And what I show you here is just one of those applications. And that is a project that we've been running at UC San Diego called Wildfire or Wi-Fire. And this is a combination of data sets, both from remote cameras to satellite data to weather data, that allows us to predict, in case of a wildfire breakout, as to where the fire will go next, in next 2 hours to 4 hours to 8 hours. That requires combination of information, which is pretty dynamic, as to what is the conditions on the ground, what is the dryness of the vegetation, to where the fire is started in the first place. And we have built at UC San Diego a combination of technologies that allowed us to predict that. And you can imagine, as when we had fires, one of the first things individuals are interested in is knowing if the fire is going to come to their street or their buildings, and as to what the firefighters can do. What I show here is screenshots of Santa Rosa fire and predictions at 8-hour intervals. Now, when we make these predictions, we have to make a guess as to where the fire started in the first place. And those requires enormous amount of computations. I see a picture of my colleague Ilkay Altintas, who runs this effort. And she coordinates this with local agencies as to how the firefighting equipment can be placed. So this is just one of the many examples of where the data and data science is evolving. For example, and I'm going to give you screenshots of 3 very different areas to give you a sense of how the analysis of data is informing us. For example, algorithms that allow us to determine how biology works or how evolution works, to methods that allow us to experiment with the toxicity of molecules without necessarily testing them on animals or humans, to algorithms that predict the extent of recidivism or possibility based on parole boards and to inform their decision making. So whether it is the biology, whether it is the material science, whether it is the social science, in all of those cases, data science is becoming a big part of it. So that's all very exciting. That allows us to imagine things that can be done in our understanding of ourselves, our society, and make a better living for ourselves. But it also has a number of flashpoints, and that requires to be concerned. Data science allows us to connect these dots, improve the quality of life, and it allows us to you can think of it as a universal solvent, just like mathematics is from understanding physical world. And there was an article a couple of years ago as to the effectiveness of data in informing us in multiple ways. Those of you who have done some automated driving, you can begin to see what is possible in real life. And right now, in many cameras and surveillance systems, we have systems trained to identify conditions, identify even individuals, and a host of data that is right now being analyzed. But then, here's the challenge. The data that we collect, the data that we see, some of it is useful, and a lot of other data, whether it is psychographic data, with health data, or whether it's voter registration data, or whether it's your social activities data, all of this data can also be used to make inferences that we may not want to see in our social life. And I'm sure you've heard of Cambridge Analytica, which was used to direct attention and identify voters and change behaviors. Now, this is a new frontier. In science and technology and engineering, especially engineering, we are often taught, we teach our students that if you can make something lighter, faster, better, cheaper, do it. You don't ask the question, should I? In fact, our students don't even know where to begin, whether it should be done. But when we come to the new science of data science, you must ask that question. Just because the data gives you the ability to look into things that you should not look from an ethical or moral perspective, how do you inform yourself? Now, there are some very obvious things that pass the reasonable test, but there are many subtle ways in which this creeps up on our students. So we have both the opportunity as well as the challenge of what data science can do. And with that thinking, we launched Data Science Institute 2 years ago in March, and we had our Mr. Science guy and health scientist all come together, and the excitement of SDSI at the San Diego campus is that it brings together a very large number of researchers from very different areas, from departments of social science to business, to engineering, to medicine. And what we've done is we have nearly 200 faculty members who are working together with the Institute in 5 different challenge areas, and they are very broadly defined: understanding, protecting the planet, enriching human life, understanding our basis of knowledge and how that knowledge can be effectively disseminated, and so on. So with all of that, the Institute is given 3 main charters. One is train the talent. So we have an undergraduate program for data science that currently has 630 students, and the first batch of about 90 students will be graduating this year in summer. Train the talent, and in order to train the talent, you need to attract talent to the region. And that's something that Institute has done pretty effectively in the last 2 years. The second is find translational benefits. The new era of data science is creating new sets of jobs, new sets of companies. Just like 40, 50 years ago, rise of semiconductors led to the rise of Silicon Valley. Right now, the field is open with respect to the kind of companies that will come up, that will improve healthcare, that will improve transportation, that will improve other domains enabled by this data science. And the third is create an ecosystem of talent including companies, including public agencies, to build an institute. So that's the charter of the institute. I'm honored to have been put in the position of pulling the team together and work with local agencies. And it has already started to make San Diego a destination for a lot of talent in data sciences, data mining. In fact, world's largest forum on data science is called Knowledge Discovery and Data. It's about 5,000 to 6,000 attendees. Will be held in San Diego Convention Center in August this year. Again, co-sponsored by the Holly Julia Data Science Institute. With that, thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Professor Gupta. As you can see, data is becoming very mainstream in all different businesses, and data is taking a much more important role here at SANDAG also. One of the things that we've done for the first time with our regional plan is really to apply the techniques of data science and all of this data that we're now starting to be able to collect to really formulate the regional plan. In the past, what we did is we would come up with a plan and we would use data to analyze and support some of the contentions that we may have had. But we've really turned that on its head with this last cycle, and we're using data to determine what the best infrastructure is, how we can connect people from where they live to where they work, as we've talked about. So here at SANDAG, we're starting to apply this data science in our everyday work, and you'll see how that is happening if you join us upstairs in the Vision Lab and how we're making these decisions. I wanted to talk just a little bit about the analytic continuum and how we use data here at SANDAG. And I'll use the Freeway Patrol as an example because of it's just germane for today's discussion. But for instance, when you take a look at data, it has different amounts of value. Okay, so data, depending upon how valuable it is, you can make better decisions or more informed decisions with it. And unfortunately, the more value the data has, the more complex it is to process it. But these are the type of data analytics that we do here at SANDAG. So for instance, we do reporting. So reporting would take a look at historical data that we have, and we would put together a report for you that would talk about, for instance, historical trends, number of accidents that may have occurred on specific freeways. And that will give you a certain amount of information. So that's good to know information. But analysis is more complex, but it gives you a better understanding of that reporting. So for instance, we can start talking about why did these accidents occur? Was it speed? Was it weather? Was it a distracted driver? Was somebody on their cell phone? We can start to understand the whys. And if we can do that, we can start to make better decisions. We can bring you information where you can make better decisions from it. Monitoring is the next step up, and monitoring really talks about what's happening now. So this is us being able to, for instance, monitor how many people are using the I-15 toll roads, for instance, at any one time. Okay, by monitoring, we can start to make sense of, was there an accident, for instance? Is traffic slowing down? Is there an incident? So monitoring allows us to start seeing data instead of like a year-old data or month-old data, more real-time data. You're all familiar with forecasting. This is really where we talk about taking historic trends and understanding what's going to happen in the future. So when we talk about this in terms of predictive analysis or forecasting, we can talk about how many accidents, for instance, we think might occur based upon how many vehicle miles are traveled, et cetera. So these would be forecasts. And as you know, we use forecasting to figure out how many housing units we're going to need or what the population is going to be. But all of these are based on historical data. So these are based on data that's already occurred, and so the decision making is really one of it's valuable information, but it's based on old data. When you start moving into predictive analytics and prescriptive analytics, which are the things that Professor Gupta was talking about, what it will allow us to do is fundamentally change the type of information that we bring you and the type of data that we'll be able to use as an agency to make decisions. So for instance, with predictive analytics, we could start to take a look at road conditions. So we can bring data in from different places. We can see how fast vehicles are going, whether or not it's raining, whether or not what the density of the cars are, and based upon that, we can start making predictions as to whether or not an accident may occur over there based upon the historical data that we had. Prescriptive analytics is even more complex, but this really talks about what actions should be taken. So imagine if we had that information, that we knew where accidents are likely to occur. Like, let's say you're headed east in the morning, and the sun is coming up, the road is wet, you see the glare, and we know that there's a high probability that there's going to be an accident on that particular place on the freeway. What if we could proactively have signs that told people to slow down? What if we could do traffic breaks? What if we could save lives by using data to make better informed decisions? So these are the type of things that the data bring to us, and this is what's so exciting about what we're doing here at SANDAG, but what everyone is doing in this sixth innovation cycle as we move into data. SANDAG's been involved in data for a long time. We've been working with data since the 70s. Most of it was historical data, and we've even entered into the big data arena without even knowing it in some cases. Like, for instance, the Intermodal Transportation Management System, which is really the I-15, and being able to monitor the ramps and allow for metering them. That happened in about 2005. As we move forward in the continuum, or timeline, what you see is that we're using more and more data, and I won't go into depth on each one of these, but essentially we've changed our modeling to take into account more data. So we now have things like synthetic populations that we work out to really understand what the population looks like in the future. We're working on things like the integrated corridor management system. We started using in the late 2010s, like the 2016 era, we started using big data, so data that was coming from places like Google, to actually be able to calibrate our models. So because that's real data, we can see people moving on the freeway, so we calibrate that data. And then, as you know, we had a problem with our forecast in 2016, late 2016. That gave us a little bit of pause, and what we did is we went back and we took a look at all of our data policies and what we were doing, and we did a lot of internal research, and basically what came out of that is that we needed to implement a data governance strategy. Data governance strategy talks not just about the quality and veracity of the data, but it also talks about things like security and privacy and those type of things. So we started working on that in 2018, and we continue on today with these data policies. And today we're using data to really drive our regional plan. So there's big data that comes from everywhere, okay? And Professor Gupta talked a little bit about that, but I just wanted to give you an idea of some of the data that SANDAG could use to provide you with better information so that you can make better decisions. So big data comes from a couple of places. There are primary places of data. For instance, there are information that comes from sensors that are in the roads, for instance, the signals, cameras, public transit, those type of things. So this primary data is data that we could analyze to make our transportation system more efficient, for instance. But then there's also a very exciting field of which is this secondary data. So if you think about a navigation app, the navigation app's primary, like if you're using Waze, the primary reason for its existence is really to get you from point A to point B so that you don't get lost. So it's an electronic map that's on your phone. And there's some added value there too, because it can route you faster or slower depending upon traffic. But that's its primary use. But the secondary use for that data, because this is where big data is created, the data that is collected from that allows us to start to understand how people travel on the roads, for instance, and what is their real path, and where are they making stops, and how are they traveling from home to work. And that helps us do better planning when we're doing our transportation plan. And the list of these type of data go on. So with an ever-shrinking budget, and I know that we've talked many times about the fact that the costs continue to go up, revenue continues to go down. What can agencies like SANDAG do to really be able to benefit the citizens of the region more? And one of the things that we can do really is to start working more with data so that we can make better informed decisions and make those decisions in real time and have a more effect on the region. A big issue is data governance, and that is something that I talked about in terms of us having a plan in place right now. It's a 3-year plan that we're working to become fully data government. We have a data governance council that we've put together, and we're looking at all aspects of this. But there are 3 big aspects, and one of our speakers will talk about this, so I'm not going to go into it in too much depth. But it has to do with the privacy of the data, the security of the data, and also making sure that the data that we use is anonymous. And the reason that we really want to be able to do this is so that staff has, once we get all this data governance in place, we want to make sure that staff has the ability to use data and know that it's the correct data that they're using. So they're not making, they know which forecast they're supposed to use. So we'd have one version of the truth. We'd have one data set. We want the leadership, you the board, to know that the data that we're using is the best quality data available, and that the decisions that we're basing upon that is the best data that exists. And also the public. We want to regain the public's trust in our data and data analytics. And I think that by having a strong data governance structure, we'll be able to accomplish that. So those are things that we're doing at SANDAG right now. And what I'd like to do now is to hand it over to our next speaker, Andrell Bauer from the City of San Diego, to talk about what she's doing.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for having me. What I want to do is talk about sort of what this looks like in practice for a government agency to use data while making decisions. So we've had a robust data program for about 5 years now that really started with the passage of an open data policy. So open data was a great place to start because it was a public-facing initiative, but it also shifted the culture internally in the city to get people to really think about data as the valuable asset that it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover 3 areas where injecting data into the decision-making process makes a big difference in the quality of service that we're providing to our residents. I chose some examples that may not be what you would typically think of when you think of smart city, but what I really want to highlight is that even small projects using existing data within your organization can help make you smarter. So the first area where data can have a big impact is in developing policy. So we have this wildly popular program called Get It Done. Get It Done, you download the application, you take a photo of a problem, and you send it off to the city to ask us to fix it. And then once you've reported the problem, you get notifications when that problem has been fixed. We've had almost 700,000 reports come in through our Get It Done app. And the data from those reports is a gold mine. It can tell us what are the problems that residents really care about and where are they happening. It can tell us how well we're doing at responding to problems and how we might need to allocate or reallocate city resources. So something we're working on right now, well, something we're constantly working on is deciding what is the next thing to add to the Get It Done app. So we could make that decision based off of anecdote, and sometimes we have to. When people ask us to add something, we have to consider that. But there's also a data-driven way to make that decision. So if someone goes to report something in this app and they can't find a button for it, they report it anyway, and they put it in the other category. So what we can do is we can take all the text that is in that other category and we can analyze it to see what are the things that people really care about. What do they want us to add to the app next? In the second area where we have used data, it's to improve service delivery. This is one of my favorite projects because we're potentially saving lives. We partnered with our fire rescue department to predict the number of 911 calls we'd get for emergency medical services in 2019. And we were able to project what level of staffing we need our ambulance contractor to provide. So we had 4 years worth of data on the volume of ambulance calls, response times, and the amount of time the ambulance spent on task. We put this data into a forecasting model that accounts for location, time of day, and season, and we were able to determine the optimal number of ambulances for each of our 8 medical response zones. Now that we have those projected staffing needs, we can specify this to our ambulance service provider. We can also monitor how better staffing levels are impacting response times. Our ambulance providers are required to meet response time standards 90% of the time, and now we have more information for contract oversight. So the final area where government should consider using data is program evaluation. Staff and policymakers, we often have to decide whether to add a new program or make changes to an existing one. Those decisions could be based on data that identified a need for the program. Throughout the life of a program, we should use data to analyze whether the program is effectively meeting its goals or whether a different program would be more effective. So one of our current projects is building a dashboard that delivers timely calculations of parking meter utilization. So we have data on our parking meter transactions, and we're working with the program managers, because they are the subject matter experts, to determine what is the best way to calculate utilization and display it for them so that they can get timely insight and take action. So once program managers are equipped with this tool, we can take it a step further. Our hope is that whenever we have potential changes to our parking meters, we could randomly select areas in which to pilot these changes. We can monitor the results in near real time. We can also compare the results of the pilot group with the results of a control group, and that would tell us with more certainty that the outcomes we're seeing can be attributed to the changes we made. Now that I've given you a few practical examples of how we've used data to make decisions, let me say that it isn't always easy. One of the challenges we face is tracking down the most reliable, high-quality source of the data we need, that one source of truth that Ray was talking about. So a city the size of San Diego, we have lots of data systems, and there isn't always agreement. Not everyone is always using the same data set to make decisions. And then once we find that one source of truth, it takes time to understand the data. So luckily, our open data program has helped us with some of this work. It turns out that a lot of the data that the public is interested in is also really useful internally. And because open data is public-facing, we have a very rigorous process in place that helps us assess quality and address security and privacy concerns. So despite these challenges, I really believe that governments should follow the private sector in treating data as a valuable asset that can help them meet their strategic goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrell. We'll now turn it over to Christina, who will talk about data law, data privacy, and data governance.
Thank you. It is an honor to be here, and I want to thank the board for especially putting up with my voice today as I'm recovering from laryngitis. So it's an honor to be here to represent Columbus, Ohio region, and to talk about some of the work we've done from the Program in Data and Governance at Ohio State. My hope today is to go a little bit deeper into data governance with some applied case studies to talk about things that are going on in Columbus. We'll talk about Smart Columbus, which I'm sure many of you have heard about, the Smart Cities Initiative and the grant Columbus got from DOT to build out not only an operating system to support the smart city infrastructure, but also a number of projects around it. And one of the things we did there was to help implement a data privacy plan, so we can talk explicitly about that privacy. In addition, I wanted to highlight some of the work that's going on in our counterpart, MORPC, which is the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, and its work through its Regional Data Advisory Committee. I will end on a note with some resources for all of those here in the room, as well as your staff. So with MORPC, one of the things that they've been doing, and it came out of their strategic plan, was to focus a committee exclusively on regional data. And through this committee, they brought together public sector, private sector, nonprofits, and academics to think strategically about how to move our region forward and use data not only to drive decisions around urban planning, but to foster economic development, to support the open government initiatives that were requested. And given that there was a lot of different needs in the room, one of the first things they did was create a regional data agenda that really serves as that near-term strategic roadmap for what they want to focus on. They are using working groups to go ahead and implement this agenda, and this is published. In these slides you have the URL, but if you go into that, It has a number of goals, each has 3 objectives, and then all of the actions are outlined in there across a number of different areas, not only data governance, but thinking about how to increase the network of stakeholders and the connections between them that enable partnerships and innovation. To think about building that capacity and the knowledge base among that network, and to also open up this data so that it can be used for innovation. There are currently 4 working groups that are implementing specific tasks within that roadmap, within the agenda that I had mentioned previously. I serve on the Data Policy Needs Survey and Toolkit, which may be of direct interest to all of you, because what it is doing is MORPC is actually surveying its membership to get a sense of where their data governance needs and priorities are over the next few years. Which will then inform the creation of a toolkit of resources so that for its members, they can share resources, whether those are resources around privacy plans or if there are resources around security. There's a very long list. It's a very long survey right now. But you'll also see on there are other things that this particular data advisory committee is working on, such as infrastructure, so making sure there's the capacity to support the data needs of the region, as well as dashboards and networking. So the Regional Information and Data Group is a way to pull together all those interested in civic data. I highlighted that needs survey and toolkit just to specify here, and I make this available because I wanted to know that this is a resource that MORPC is happy to share once it is out. But we're looking through prioritizing a number of very specific details in a number of domains, not just privacy, but also data ethics, as we were talking about earlier, equity and inclusion, a lot of things, including cybersecurity and open data as well. Another MORPC resource that it sounds like may be of interest, given where you are right now, are these data personas. We've heard a lot so far from my other panelists in terms of how data can be used to inform your decision-making and strategic planning. But beyond that urban planning, you can also be used by others outside of this body. And one of the things that MORPC did early was create a series of data user personas that they saw themselves serving through their open data efforts. And so that's, again, a public resource that's available to you. Shifting gears for a moment to talk about Smart Columbus. I know all of you were talking about the grants earlier this morning. This is an example for our region where we were able to secure a $40 million US DOT grant out of the Smart City Challenge. And that grant pulled together our private industry, our the Ohio State University academic partners, as well as our regional governments, to really think forward about the vision we wanted to have for our region and what those the innovative solutions around transportation could be. Core to that project is developing an operating system that supports not only a number of pilot projects that were funded out of that 40 million, and you'll see those in a moment, but to develop the common data infrastructure that would support also the open data aspects, so that as projects were completed, if people wanted to request data, use that data, innovate on that data, visualize that data, there was a way for it not only to be brought up and run the individual projects, but also to be visualized and shared out in terms of open data. So as you see here, there are a number of different projects that we're running through this grant, which is still underway, I should note. We have another year. So there are a number of initiatives that build upon things that are already going on at USDOT, such as the connected vehicle environment. But you see in here Multimodal Transportation, which was an app developed for the city so that we could pull in and work with the scooter providers, the bike rental companies, our Central Ohio Transit Authority, et cetera, so it was in a single place. We have another initiative coming back to privacy where we're trying to look at how can we get our prenatal assistance in terms of transit to individuals who most need it and may not have the resources either in terms of money or rides to get them where they need to be. And so there's a wide variety of projects here with a lot of sensitive data, including health data. To address the governance of all of this information as the system was being built, there were over 100 organizations pulled together, sending resources to work on working groups. Again, this is a collective of academic, public, and private stakeholders that were brought together and tasked in 3 different working groups. So there was a data working group, again, looking through those use cases and the personas. What are the challenges that we want to solve and how? There was a technical working group that brought together individuals to think through technical aspects of the development and design and best practices. And then there was a policy working group on which I served, along with Dennis Hirsch, who facilitated the data privacy aspect. And that really split to data management and data privacy. We'll go into a moment as to why. But data privacy really looked at the ethics and privacy controls that had to be into place for an open data environment as well as the individual projects. So we're now at a place now, both of these were published in their final versions and sent to DOT this past September. But we now sit with a data management plan and a data privacy plan that can be referenced by all of you, built on the latest and greatest and federal standards. What I want to do next is talk about what those source documents were, how these came together, and what some of the key controls are in here that would be worth considering as you move forward. So the data management plan, as I mentioned, for those of you who don't know a data management plan, it's a very technical document. It goes into a lot of specification about how data should look, how data should be handled, and where that guidance is in terms of from the acquisition of data. So Smart Columbus actually pulls information from private partners into its ecosystem, as well as what data access controls need to be there and for security purposes. And then on the open data side, what those use scenarios look like. To help with that, one of the things that's required is a data inventory. And I'll note that as you're thinking about data decision making, this is really helpful to know. All of us outside of California, of course, have been thinking of you here with the CCPA passing and the importance of whether or not data contains PII, because a lot of the information we've been talking about today isn't necessarily PII. However, when you talk about transportation, of course, you're thinking about geolocation. And if anyone hasn't seen this yet, I always like to flag a recent New York Times piece on geolocation and surveillance. If you haven't seen it, I would definitely Google it, because they show you how your phone pings essentially follow you around the day, and that data is being collected. That all said, one of the things we need to think about in terms of open data is, do we need latitude and longitude? And if so, at what level? What's the cost-benefit analysis of balancing your constituent privacy against that policy need? So does it contain PII? Is something we need to track with the systems, what data is being generated, whether that piece of data does involve PII. But having this level of detail really helps with the policy formation down the road. How often we collect it can inform the decision making down the road. But then also thinking through transparency in terms of what the uses are, who has ownership, where is it located? Is it something that's being held within a public body, or is it a private partnership? These are all aspects that get to be thought through. And in our case, in Smart Columbus, this is for every data set. So I mentioned we have a number of individual projects, 7 projects running in addition to the operating system. So for every one, we have this type of dictionary in place. The data privacy plan itself, I say it's a high-level plan. It comes in over 70 pages. So it governs privacy controls. So what are the things that need to be thought through to guide and inform the policy decisions and the governance practice for the Smart Columbus ecosystem, as well as security controls to make sure that the information you're trying to protect doesn't get out. And we talked about anonymity before. I prefer to talk about de-identification. This was actually a conversation we had quite a bit, because it's really hard to assure people of anonymity in an age where data can be re-aggregated after it's released. And so where this particular group ended up with on our working group was that de-identification and putting safeguards in place to make sure that that de-identification, you think through things like, as we were talking about geolocation, perhaps you don't share the exact latitude and longitude, but you roll that up to a block level or a zip code level. It's different than an anonymization, but it is something you can do. And so one thing I will note, as we went down this process, there were a lot of things that informed it. There are guiding light documents, which we'll talk about in a moment. But it was definitely an iterative development process with reviews from all of those committees. So the technical individuals got to review it. We had the lawyers on the policy and urban planners on the policy side. And then, of course, we had users on the data side who were all involved. It took over a year. Talking about those guiding documents, and if you want to pull this, the final version, you can definitely see this, but I'll note it was important for us to look at, of course, the existing body of law, both at the state, federal, international level in terms of privacy law, but also open records law, because in these systems we have to be considerate of both. And one fortunate things of, as we're building these systems, NIST has wonderful guidance and a number of different guiding documents that inform not only the protection of PII and that confidentiality and how you build that into a system, but also security standards for these systems and privacy controls for these systems. And so we were able to leverage all of that, as well as a lot of policy research that has been done around open data and de-identification. We are not the first city to go down this path. As you had just heard, in addition to San Diego, there are a number of others we were able to leverage. San Francisco, also here in California, open data risk assessments, so ways you can think through what are the privacy risks to flag those and consider them as you implement. We also, given that we had a connected vehicle pilot tied to US DOT, we were able to leverage what was done in Tampa. But again, it's a cyclical process where we had to tie in a number of different perspectives as we went, and we had to expect that these plans would shift because there were a lot of different competing interests. What is possible and feasible now technically goes far and beyond what we are compelled to do legally, and sometimes that runs into ethics issues as well, and that may not align with what our constituents expect. So there was constant iteration and conversation around how do you take those guiding documents and turn that into this policy. So 2 years, lots of organizations, and we already talked about how it was a multi-stakeholder process. And what that led to is a number of high-level principles that, again, these will look familiar to those who've been following CCPA. They follow the fair information practices. But they really talk about thinking about the data we collect and how do you minimize that to make it use specific so that the information we're collecting for transportation purposes is used for transportation purposes, that there is notice and consent to individuals and transparency around what that process looks like, and that identity is shielded and protected in addition to having the secure environment to ensure that it doesn't go out. I should note there are accountability mechanisms in terms of governance bodies that we can look at here in a second. I'm not going to go into detail on all of these. I would urge you to look to the document, but know that the document itself does spell out what those legal protections and principles are that guide the Smart Columbus system in terms of how data should be handled and governed, how PII is defined, what safeguards or guardrails, if you will, should exist to ensure that this project lives on in a way that supports the plan. Privacy controls, again, a lot of these should look familiar, but it does address not only notice and consent and how personally identifiable information could be used or shared, but it talks about data retention, transparency, accountability. I would also note deletion, which is something that, again, for those who are following CCPA, is not new, but it was actually something that was new for our group to think through. So it wasn't just a matter of should users be able to access and correct information, but should they be able to go in and delete it. We do have a data curator who is responsible as data sets are brought into the system. I had mentioned earlier we have private vendors that generate data or may want to include data sets to import into our open data platform and the operating system for visualization and aggregation with the other data. We have to think about what is the impact of including that data will it enable the re-identification of our citizens, for example? So it actually talks about what are the processes you can use and what does that data curator need to do, both in terms of a benefit and risk analysis associated with certain data sets. We talk about privacy testing. So once we have everything up and running, making sure that we do the equivalent of penetration testing on a cybersecurity side to make sure that we can't get personal data back out. But then, of course, having review boards, which I'll call out here explicitly. For those of you who are used to working academic setting or health setting, you've probably heard of an institutional review board to ensure that as human subjects are involved, everything goes according to plan and does not impede upon their own liberties and rights. An IRB in this case functions in the same purpose, but for privacy. There's also another privacy and security board that will govern those two particular aspects for Smart Columbus going forward, in addition to that third-party auditing. Something I will note here, too, is that there is specific language and guidance in this document for our third-party contractors, because this is a very complex project with a lot of public and private partnerships. We had to include and recognize what that might look like and how that impacts that contract process. I'm not going to go into security controls. If anyone wants to talk cybersecurity, find me after. But there are a number of those that are, again, specified and required in the document, because that is how we protect this information that has been collected through the system. Privacy impact assessments is a key component of each of our projects and the data sets being brought in. For those of you who aren't familiar with a privacy impact assessment process, the piece here is it really it looks at the data that's either being brought into the system or being let out of the system or being collected in the first place, and asks you not only to describe it, but to think about what access, redress, and correction looks like, what security controls need to be, and how it would impact the privacy of your constituents and users. So I want to end on just a couple other resources here that may be of use to the board as you continue down this journey. Something that we participate in at Ohio State as well as some of our region is the Civic Data Privacy Leaders Network. For those of you who don't know, this is actually facilitated through an NSF grant and hosted by the Future of Privacy Forum, which in its own right provides a lot of resources to civic bodies that are working in this space. You see in the top left a guide to de-identification and all the different flavors it comes in, as well as a guide you see here in the bottom, both of these published by FPF, that really talks about how do you talk about integrated data systems. And so I urge you, if you're interested, both of those are open resources for local governments. The other one is a Metro Lab network, which San Diego and UCSD is already a member of. And this is really a place for academic entities like Ohio State and their city counterparts to come together and talk about how to be innovative around data-driven decision-making and the infrastructure that supports it. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Our last presenter is Sanjeev Nanda from SANDAG.
Good morning. I've been now with SANDAG since September, and it's kind of been a really exciting period. And I hope you can appreciate how comprehensive panel that we've put together. I'm looking at lots of collaboration, from each of these panelists in the coming months and coming years to come with Rajesh Gupta, the HDSI. I think that's a great opportunity for SANDAG and for San Diego to benefit from having this data science institute here. With the city of San Diego and the chief data officer with the open data portal, I think there's a great opportunity, as I'm going to talk about in a minute, about NextOS, which is a clearinghouse for transportation data for decades to come. That was in the planning phases of, and then with learnings from Smart Columbus and MORPC, and you just saw how comprehensive a data governance and privacy plan that has been put together in Columbus. I think we have lots to, we've been doing this. When I joined, I discovered that we've been doing this for the last year or two. We've made some progress. There's first steps being taken to get our governance in order. But that's a very, very important piece of what we should be focused on in the next year or two. And so I think there's a lot that I expect that will be, this is an amazing panel because it covers all aspects, the usage, the application of data that Ray as well talked about, as well as the governance of data and how we can be safe to use it. So I come to SANDAG from Qualcomm, and Qualcomm, as you know, it's all about technology, and this next OS and the use of data for regional transportation is, as we've seen at Qualcomm, all these technologies that have evolved, like communications and sensing and compute and big data and data analytics and deep learning. We're doing so much with that at Qualcomm. And then as you move to more real time, like Ray Major mentioned, as you move to more real time, you think about online simulation and then real time controls and so on. So this is something that is occurring in all industries today, and regional transportation better be utilizing all these advances in technology as we move forward. So, bringing all these technologies to bear is what bear on regional transportation is what the next OS is all about. So that's I think and actually, if you think about it, the private companies that are in transportation, like our shared ride providers, they are using all manners of data, not just transportation data, but as Ray Major mentioned, weather data and data to do with. It turns out I was learning they look at Twitter feeds and sports results and so on to try and figure out where to place drivers for shared rides. And so using data for making efficient use of transportation infrastructure is just, we cannot not be using that if we want to get efficient. So Next OS is all about that. It's about kind of modernizing our, the cloud behind the transportation system, so we can use all these technologies, communication, sensing, compute, to manage our transportation supply and demand in the most efficient way. So there are some. It's not all. It's not all new. It's basically again, many examples have been mentioned by previous panelists about things that are already being done, which are examples of this. So. I'll mention a couple. We've talked. I think Ray Major mentioned the ICMS on the I-15 corridor, and then this earlier, just before in the early part of this meeting, there was what is it called, the FS, the Fleet Management System of the California Highway Patrol, Fleet Service Patrol. And so that they actually have a very good example that I'll come to, where utilizing data, you can achieve high efficiencies in our goals, and I'll come to that example in a second. So what is it? So the Next OS, therefore, is a data clearing house and suite of data tools, suite of applications, software that utilizes this data. And there's this data which is static and changes slowly over time that sometimes we've been using for forecasting and planning. And then there's this data that is sensed in the real time, which can be used for real-time monitoring and prediction and control. Again, I'm repeating things that Ray Major mentioned a little while back. And so the Next OS is data and tools that cover all that range from static to highly dynamic real-time data. And so the examples of that are some of them are well understood. So in the case of planning and policy, you look at forecasts and make decisions about and make recommendations about what infrastructure to build out, and as well as making policies about demand management and things, lane management and things like that. And basically the goal of these planners is to maximize some objectives that we have for our region, and those include quality of life, and those include economic growth. So somehow the drivers for this planning and forecasting need to be economic growth and quality of life. So that's what drives data to our to planning and recommendations. The next one is getting to real time. Now you, excuse me. Now you start thinking about operations, like your smart intersections, street lights, traffic lights, and ramp monitoring, and lane management, and congestion management, and so on. So that is real-time and operational data. That's used by our the operations like Caltrans and MTS and so on. And then when all that data is available and being and our resources are running efficiently, then the users who are interested, our end users who are interested in transportation in the region, who want to make journeys, as well as all this increasing amounts of package delivery and goods delivery within the region, all that can be orchestrated by some kinds of app-based service providers and so on, and there's a seamless kind of interface that allows you to look at transit options, congestion on roadways, and make choices based on cost and so on, and time to get to the place you want. So those are so it's very, very comprehensive vision, but then private industry is already well on its way to doing this, and we better enable that. And so the data, so our goal is to, for us to have a region-wide data clearinghouse that brings together, makes available in some standardized fashion this data. We take the responsibility of governance and privacy, and then make it available for private businesses to run their businesses on top. So that's kind of the vision, and it's obviously a lot to capture in this first opportunity that I have to speak here. I'm hoping that over the years we'll learn more and more about what this next to us will turn out to be. I want to take 2 more minutes to talk about this next thing, which is a practical example of what's running. Recently deployed. It's this freeway service patrol. And so this is very, very interesting because it has such great impact on travel within the region. So an incident occurs on one of our freeways, and it takes a few minutes to detect that the traffic is slowing down. And I think for every minute that there is a slowdown in a lane, in rush hour, you start building a 5 to 6 minute delay that is going to last. And so if it lasts 10 minutes, then you suddenly have an hour worth of delay. And that means, tens of thousands of people are going to be impacted on their commute. And the statistics suggest that that over a period of a month, over the period of in January, there were 5,000 such incidents on our freeways, January up to now, like in the last 3 weeks, and maybe half of them are during peak periods, during rush hour. So you can imagine the tens of thousands of hours that are being spent on the freeways. So a very nice automated sort of method was devised and deployed, where we now place, and we talked about it earlier on during the meeting. So we now deploy these tow trucks and so on throughout the region, and they are available and they're running, and they have automatic vehicle locators, so you know where they are. You can get frequent responses from them. You can even track whether they are actually on duty or not. So so all that is automated, and it's available real time. This kind of thing, these things were already deployed years ago, but they were basically the drivers submitted paper reports, and they were compiled at the end of the month to figure out if they were in compliance or not. And now we're doing real time compliance of these tow truck that are deployed throughout the region. And it turns out that only the whole region now needs only 3 CHP officers to kind of manage this whole network, and the statistics suggest that we're meeting our 10-minute or less target of clearing congestion in these regions. So this is just one example. I think we have so much opportunity to do things like this. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Sanjeev. Just to wrap it up, this was the second in a series of informational presentations. The next presentation that is informational will be on February 14th, and it's going to be a primer on modeling and VMT and air quality, things like that. We will be having panelists coming to us from the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, who's going to talk about statewide policies and goals. The Air Resources Board, we're going to talk about GHG goals that SANDAG has to meet and why we have to meet them. And Caltrans representative who will be talking about new state requirements for reducing VMT at a project level.